Great, thanks so much. So we'll take the recording off when we get to the fun part, which is all the questions. But let me tell you just a little bit. Hopefully, some of you have been able to join us in the past in talking about the polling that we've had the great fortune to do over the last 12 years. And this is kind of a unique survey research project. A lot of the stuff that I do is really sort of used for internal and strategic purposes and isn't sort of, just put out there for anyone to look at. And so this is one of the fun ones because all of this data, and in fact, every single question that we've asked over the entirety of a dozen years now is available at the Colorado College State of the Rockies website. They've got a wonderful search function where you can pull up past years, you can see it by state. And it's just really kind of an amazing effort on their part. And it was really started because they thought, gosh, there's so many issues that really affect, especially the interior West. There's not a lot of public opinion research that's highlighting how people are feeling in this region. I'd say Colorado and Arizona a little more than some of the other states, but on many things, really not a lot of wealth of data. And so we started with, well, I'll show you in a second. We started with just 5 states and have gradually expanded to be the entire interior West, where certainly there's so many public lands and so much of the work that I work on and issues really affects this region more so than many other parts of our country. So as we go along, it's a little hard for me to look at the data and then look at the chat and answer any questions. So I'm going to ignore the chat, but if you have questions, feel free to put them in there. And then when we get done, I'll be able to better see those and can respond to them. This is a quick snapshot. There's way more questions that are available on the website that I mentioned. And honestly, I just Google it every single time. Just State of the Rockies Institute at Colorado College poll, and you'll find it. So anyway, so let's get to the fun stuff. So this is also one of the unique things about this survey is that it's a fairly large survey. So we spoke to over 3,400 people, and gradually over the years, we've changed the methodology. So we still incorporate telephone, but as sometimes during these presentations, people tell me, I never answer my phone. So we also incorporate online interviews where we invite people to participate via an email. And luckily, lots of people do, and you can see the numbers. We had 430 here in Colorado. That's a fairly typical sample size. Sometimes we're around 500, but we're doing so many interviews in all of these 8 states. We also did something, I won't highlight a lot of those results today, but just for time's sakes, but we also did additional interviews among Black voters and among Native American voters, since they represent a smaller but still important part of the population in this region. That gives us greater confidence in being able to look at those particular subgroups. Obviously, there's a number of Latino voters, and we get a significant enough number of interviews with them to just sort of look at it on the natural. But when we look at, and we'll see some numbers that are really reflective of the region overall, and then the population overall in this region, everything gets weighted back to sort of its true proportions. We do this every year, usually in January, and we did this time again, January 5th through 23rd. Of course, there's a margin of error and all that fun stuff. I won't go into all the boring stuff here, but there are 2 firms involved. And so we are a bipartisan research team, and when we're representing candidates, we're on different sides of the aisle, but this firm and I have worked together over the last, well, let's see, our children are both infants, and now they're freshmen in college. We started working together on lots of these conservation type polls. And as I mentioned, we've gradually increased the number of states. So some of the really interesting part of the data that I'm going to share today is some of the changes that have happened over time. But just know that when we're doing that, we're really comparing apples to apples. So if it's looking back at 2011, I'm comparing just those 5 states. or 2016, it would have been 7 states. For the last several years, we've been looking at the entire interior West, which includes Idaho was the last state that we added. But Colorado, I think most of you are probably in Colorado. Colorado's been in this survey the entire time. Not shockingly, since it's a Colorado University sponsoring it, but okay, so we asked a broad question as one of the first questions when we interviewed respondents, and asked them to tell us when they thought about the future of nature, and we defined that for them as meaning our land, water, air, and wildlife, would they say that they are feeling more hopeful or more worried? And even just in the last year, and this doesn't always happen, a lot of times we'll see great consistency in the data, but even just in the last year, we've gone from, again, people were more pessimistic than they were hopeful. In 2021, it was 3 and 5 saying they were more worried rather than 36% at hopeful. Today, that margin has widened. So today we're at 69% saying they are worried, 28% saying that they're hopeful. And we know last year we followed that question up with an open-ended question where we asked them, why were they hopeful or why were they worried? And for the most part, a lot of the responses about worry were related to climate change. So I know we just talked about the picture of Denali and what's happening there. And that was certainly one of the main themes, not exclusively so, but one of the main themes that really emerged in the responses. Folks are more concerned throughout the entire West. So we really see a majority in every single state telling us that when they think about the future of nature, that they are more concerned than hopeful right now. And Colorado is actually one of the more pessimistic states, 75%, so 3/4 telling us that they are more worried. A few things else that we saw last time was a concern about growth and development, sort of loss of habitat, all of the good things that MALT is working on all the time in terms of why I became involved with MALT, and hopefully you will continue to support them as well, because that concern about sort of sprawl and these beautiful areas that we love being sort of overtaken by crowding and development. But people have a number of concerns, so it's not just those. We've asked a number of different issues over the years and asked people to tell us whether they think that's a problem in their state, and if so, is an extremely serious problem, very serious, somewhat serious, or just not a problem there. And you can see for a number of things that we have asked over the years, this is the 2022 data. You can see most people are saying, 2/3 or greater are saying that these are at least somewhat serious problems. You get a little more gradation if you're looking at those who said it's extremely or very serious problem. Obviously, inadequate water supplies is topping the list West-wide right now. Colorado's very true to form on that. And a number of other things where we have a majority that are telling us that that's an extremely or very serious problem. What I think is more significant, though, is the shift over time. So that first column, this is just looking at those 5 states that where we started this survey research program in 2011, and then comparing it today in 2022. You can see that for all but 2 of these, we've seen double-digit increases in terms of the proportion that is saying that those are a problem. Those are an extremely or very serious problem in their state. Obviously, the biggest being a 30-point increase in concern about water supplies, but also very significant increases in folks saying as problem in terms of climate change or loss of natural areas, loss of habitat, poorly planned growth and development, even water quality has increased fairly dramatically. So significant numbers in terms of that, in that increase right there. On one of those issues, climate change, that's definitely one where we've seen sort of a very sustained increase over time. I mean, you can look at even just in the last couple of years in the West, we're up at now at, I mean, just 2020 was at 66%. Now we're at 2022. We've got 3/4 saying that's a serious problem. So it's really been a fairly dramatic shift and sort of brought into stark contrast in this last few years. So we asked it a different way as well. This is a question that actually center from Yale that looks at a lot of public research in terms of views and perceptions on climate change. They sort of established this as a how do you figure out what people want to do about climate change? It's okay to say it's a problem, but are they willing to do anything about it? And you can see really, I mean, look at that 20-point increase since 2011 in terms of the folks saying that immediate action is necessary there along the top row. And taken together, we now have 65% saying that some action, at least some action, ought to be taken in terms of the interior West, telling us that. Nationally, it's even just a little bit higher there. This year, in a new set of questions, so we have not asked before, we asked respondents to tell us about different events. Now, many of us might connect some of these to climate change, or sort of some of the impacts. We didn't place it in that frame, but we just asked them how concerned they were about each of these. Were they very, somewhat, not to, or not at all concerned? And what you're seeing here in the sort of the darker middle of that bar is those saying very concerned, which you can see, especially for drought and then wildfires. We've got a majority saying that they're very concerned. The total concerned at the end of the bar there, we really have 3 and 5 or greater saying that they're concerned about any of these potential events that are happening in their state. And I will note, we were just after the Marshall Fire here in Colorado. But honestly, there wasn't a big change in terms of Coloradans. Of course, this was not a question we'd asked before, but another question where we're tracking views about fire is actually exactly the same as in 2021. I was a little concerned it might, make a big spike, weird spike that would be out of the norm here in Colorado. But we've kind of been concerned about wildfire for a while. So it really didn't create that sort of dramatic jump. These are the overall numbers West-wide. We now have 9 and 10 for the past 2 years telling us that they feel like it's a serious problem in their state, that there's uncontrollable wildfires that threaten homes and property. We worded, I know it's a little cumbersome language, but we worded like that purposely because we know sometimes fire can be good, right? In terms of forest health, or definitely with native prairies and other parts of the country, that there can be a really productive use of fire. That's important, but obviously it's the ones that are out of control that are so problematic. But you can see over the last 6 years, this has really ticked up across the West. And when you look at the concern levels about more frequent and severe wildfires, Colorado and Montana are really the 2 states that have both the most intense concern, almost 2/3 in our 2 states saying we're very concerned, and then overall really being at least somewhat concerned. But it's not like, all these are 3/4 or greater saying that registering some concern. And in fact, one question that we asked this year was about lack of planning for potential natural disasters like floods or wildfires. And 4 and 5 told us that was a serious problem in their state as well. And honestly, more of the time when I've talked to people about catastrophic issues, especially flooding, for example, usually they overestimate how well prepared communities are, to be honest. So it's sort of brought into sharp relief that people are saying, no, we need to plan even more than we are today. And then obviously we saw big jumps, as I mentioned before, in terms of concern about water supplies. Again, Colorado is one of those that is telling us when it comes to drought and reduced snowpack, almost 9 and 10 saying that they're at least somewhat concerned, over 2/3 telling us today that they're very concerned about that. Utah was also quite high, but a lot of times we'll see this kind of sort of upstream versus downstream, and the Southwest being the most concerned, but obviously with Colorado and Utah, we're sort of the source of a lot of the water for the rest of the region. And And folks here are telling us that they're very concerned about that. So it's really kind of stark and stands out. The seriousness of water problems has also risen. I mentioned a lot of those other things, but some of these we haven't asked over the entire period of time since 2011. And you can see since 2016, we've seen a 22-point increase in the proportion telling us that drought is an extremely or very serious problem, and a 15-point increase in terms of those telling us that low level of water in rivers is a serious problem as well. You know, and it's obviously people being more aware often means that when it comes to funding things, when it comes to investing in or actually being more water wise and putting into place conservation practices, that people are more likely to take those actions. We know from other research that we've done. So, you know, it's important to sort of monitor and look at people's perceptions, because that often leads to actions. We did ask about specific actions as well, and more so on the public lands front, but we did ask one about a choice that is people are often asked to take in terms of how we deal with water. Diversions are something that's been proposed in Colorado, well, and has taken place in Colorado before. But generally, people put a lot of faith in water conservation and reducing use, and even increased recycling or reuse of water is something that people are increasingly comfortable with. And you can see just how overwhelming that response is there. So 2022, it is an election year. I won't get political on you, but we did ask people to tell us in comparison to a lot of other issues that, you know, we all think about every day, things like the economy or healthcare or education, things that really do top the list of things that are often factors in terms of voting. How important are issues involving essentially nature, clean water, clean air, wildlife, and public lands, and deciding whether to support an elected public official? And this is a question we've asked before. So in 2016, we had 3 in 10 saying it was very important. In fact, it was a primary factor. That's gone up 10 points to this year's survey. So 41% telling us that it's really a primary factor. Almost everyone saying it's one of several issues they at least consider, and very few today, only 14%, sort of dismissing it as a factor. Now, whether it's the number one factor or not for all those people sort of in that mushy middle, you know, remains to be seen. But certainly it's something where we're seeing the trend being that they're factoring that in. And overall, we really don't see this as a dramatically partisan issue. I work on lots of things where there's 50 or 60 point divides. And that's not the case here. You can see that there's somewhat of an effect, but really pretty minimal. Lots of folks telling us that it's something that would factor into their responses. And in fact, many of the groups that end up deciding elections or could be very important this year are ones that are groups that are telling us they're even more likely to consider this realm of issues in terms of whether or not to support a public official. So whether it's moderates, whether it's all those newcomers that moved into our states over the last few years, whether it's young voters or Latinos, all of those groups tend to be ones that are often communicated with and targeted by those political campaigns. So it does matter what elected officials do, what they support, and certainly we test a number of different issues that could come up before, whether in Congress or whether at the state level. One of those is something that has been talked about a lot. There's actually this America the Beautiful legislation that's been proposed, but it's essentially setting a national goal of conserving 30% of our land and inland waters, and then 30% of ocean areas by the year 2030. So they call it 30 by 30. And in concept, we have got lots of support and pretty consistent support over the last several years, with 3/4 now telling us that that's something that they support, and nearly half saying that they're strongly in support. In fact, Colorado was a little bit higher. And it's interesting, even though these are all interior Western states, we've seen in other work that the oceans aspect, although we didn't get to follow up on every questions here, but the oceans aspect has been something that people are really attracted to. They're very concerned about about our oceans these days. And there's a number of other bills that are out there for marine sanctuaries and things like that. And while there generally are some, party tends to cut the data more so than almost any other aspect on lots of these policies, but we still see 3 and 5 Republicans supportive of this, and the overwhelming majority of independents and Democrats likewise. So it really is something that cuts across partisan lines. Another one that does that too is the idea of creating new national parks or monuments or wildlife refuges or tribal protected areas, both to protect our history as well as for outdoor recreation. And it often gets mentioned how much of the interior West is already conserved as public lands, but people are overwhelmingly supportive of the creation of new areas. And when I've talked to people and done some work for related to national parks, people get that they want to take care of what exists, of course, as we'll see, but they also really feel like that some places need to be have that higher level of protection as well. And so in every state, we've got the overwhelming majority telling us that that's something that they support, as well as what I just mentioned, sort of taking care of what we already have, which is addressing some of that backlog of infrastructure repairs. There's a legislation that's been proposed as well that would basically create sort of a job corps, not unlike maybe what was available with the WPA, but get folks out on public lands to help reduce the risk of wildfires and sort of protect our natural resources in these areas, because we know that often there are significant backlogs in terms of what needs to be addressed. And so in every state, certainly in Colorado, 9 and 10 in support there, but really strong support across the board. And I will say that people, and we'll talk about recreation in a second and how much people get out in the West, but one of the things that we've consistently seen is that people also attach public lands to the economy. They tend to think of it as something that helps their state's economy. An overwhelming 74%, almost 3/4 West-wide, it's a little bit higher in Colorado again, tell us that they feel like the presence of those areas really helps their state economy. Almost no one feels like that it hurts it. And we are unique. I will say that. I've done work again around the country, and visitation, especially for national public lands, but really any types of outdoor recreation are much higher in the Western states than they are in most places. You can see we just gave up asking people, hey, do you get out on public lands or not? We've started asking them, how often do you do that? Because we get, look at this, 1 in 5 that said in the last year they visited those places more than 20 times. I will say lots of those people are hunters or anglers. They are out there to hunt or fish on public lands. And we only have about 1 in 10 that are saying that they're just not visiting those areas. Hiking and camping are by far the most common outdoor activities. We've tried to include a really inclusive list here, and certainly many of these people are doing multiple ones of these. But you can see that whether it's bird watching, whether it's boating, of course that varies by state quite a bit, whether it's some of the winter sports, you can see that lots of people are out there doing many types of activities. And one thing that we asked for the first time this year was we asked them if they're changing those outdoor recreation habits. So we said, in the last 2 or 3 years, have you made changes in where or when you recreate outdoors due to, and these were rotated. So they heard crowding and more people. And we had almost half, look at that, and a majority in Colorado, 58% saying they have changed where or when they recreate outdoors due to crowding and more people. 31% in Colorado, so again, higher than the West-wide average, telling us that they've also changed where or when they recreate outdoors due to changes in the climate, such as fire or less snow or water. So we are one of the higher states in terms of indicating that people are making changes, both due to crowding or due to what they perceive as changes in the climate. One other note that I think is really relevant for us here at MALT is that one other issue that we've seen going up gradually west side, especially here in Colorado, is poorly planned growth and development. So while it's been sort of a serious problem for a while, the intensity of that has really shot up. And so it's not that all growth or all development is bad, certainly not. But folks are concerned about how that's implemented and where that's put, making sure that it's something that's sustainable and that doesn't, sort of gobble up lots of our undeveloped areas. So I just added that as a bit of a footnote to what we've talked about here. So let me stop sharing because then I can see the chat. I can see people's faces. It makes things a little bit easier.